and welcome to the show that puts the heart and soul into Sundays, bringing faith and ethics to the discussions that matter most.
Coming up today on Sunday Morning Live, the Met Office issued its first ever red extreme heat warning, with temperatures expected to hit 40 degrees tomorrow. Meanwhile, religious groups in Scotland are calling for greater action on climate change. We ask if religion is our best hope to save the planet.
With breakdancing set to become an Olympic sport at the next
Glasgow, representatives of more than 30 faith communities in Scotland have this week written to the conference president, Alex Sharma, worried that the commitments made by countries there aren't being met and calling for more action. It's a big issue, and this week we ask, is religion our best hope in fighting climate change? Here to discuss this issue is Dr. Maureen Sire from Interfaith Scotland, journalist Charlie Peters, Melanie Nazareth from Christian Climate Action, and from Humanist Climate Action, we're joined by Laurie Marriott. Good to see you all. Thanks for coming in. Laurie, I'll start with you. So a whole range of faith leaders from Scotland clubbed together. They want to put climate change at the top of the agenda. This should be applauded, shouldn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Obviously, I'm from a non-religious kind of belief group, but I absolutely applaud that effort and, the letter in particular. What I would say, though, is we don't have the most recent census data yet, but the most recent figures from the British Social Attitudes Survey show that 53% of people living in Britain actually identify as having no religion. Climate crisis is obviously an issue where we really need everybody to be on board. We need to bring everybody, along on that journey. So, we do need those non-religious people to engage as well, and it is a majority of the population.
Faith brings people together, though, doesn't it?
It does bring people together, but other things can bring people together as well. So, obviously I work on this issue too, but I'm not religious, but it does bring our members together as well.
So, Maureen, does it feel very inclusive if it's just religious leaders doing this? I mean, Laurie isn't included in that.
Actually, I think, yes, it's very important that everyone is engaged in this. It's a climate crisis. And actually, when I say it's a climate crisis, the climate isn't in crisis. Humanity's in crisis, and I think it's a deeply spiritual crisis. It's a crisis of greed, of apathy, of inequality. So it really is a deeply spiritual crisis that I think faith communities have got something to really add to the conversation. But it's adding to the conversation. The conversation needs the non-religious, it needs scientists, everyone. So
people have been getting in touch. Gary has tweeted in about this. He says, praying, we've been trying that for over 2,000 years, can confidently report no results yet. So he's told us how it is. I mean, we can't pray this problem away, can we?
Absolutely cannot pray this problem away. And actually I'm really, and in fact the faith leaders of Scotland are about, yes, prayer. We did have a prayer and meditation vigil in George Square, but there was also action. There's also been so much action that faith communities and others can take. So it's prayer and action. I think the two go hand in hand. And faith communities are not saying we should just pray it away. They're saying, yes, pray, but take action. And it has to be global action. Individual, governments, religious communities, non-religious. It is the crisis of our time.
OK, Charlie, so Alex Sharma, in the front page of the Observer, big headline there, he's being interviewed today. He's accused some Tory leaders, the Tory leadership, of being lukewarm on this issue. So here it is.
Yep.
I mean, it's right at the front of the Observer. It's really, really important. If politicians aren't taking this seriously, it's great that religious leaders are, isn't it? They're taking on the baton where our political leaders aren't.
Well, I think our political leaders have given an enormous amount of time into climate change.
This is the man who was in charge of COP26, and he says they're not.
Well, I mean, the government that he serves in at the moment has committed to a net zero agenda by 2050, so I'm not sure that's the case. I think, generally speaking, I think the government as it stands at the moment sort of has Extinction Rebellion policies, but in a slower time frame. I don't think it's true to say that the government in general is not focusing on this. I think what Mr. Sharma is focusing on here is more the leadership contestants at the moment. Now, of course, we have to take into account that net zero, while popular among certain parts of the country, I think among the Tory membership, the people they're relying on for votes to get into Downing Street aren't necessarily wild about this policy approach. And so it makes sense, I think, for many of them to be quite coy on it at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, Melody, science is the way forward, isn't it? I'm just hearing all the people who've spoken before you, and it feels like science is such an important part of it, and faith is just a sort of side issue.
Of course, science is really, really important because we have to listen to the scientists. It informs what we do. But if you just listen to the scientists, you're only hearing half the picture, because actually this is more than just a scientific crisis. This is a crisis of, as Maureen said, it's a crisis of spirituality. And by that I don't mean religion. I mean, it's a crisis of the way we live as human beings. And we need something more than just science. Science will inform what we need to do, but we need inner change, don't we?
Yeah.
That's really important.
I'm sort of swaying. I'm hearing the faith person. I'm thinking, yeah, maybe it is faith and spirituality. And then I'm hearing you who perhaps aren't saying that, Laurie, and I'm thinking, oh, yeah, maybe that's right. But actually, the fact is, over 80% of the world's population have a faith or a spiritual connection. If you can get that group of people together and mobilise them, that is so powerful. These are people who believe, most of them, that there's a bigger power that created the earth, and this is a stewardship thing. It's a role to pass it on. That's really powerful, isn't it? Religion is powerful.
Absolutely, yeah, it is powerful. But if you look at somewhere like the United States, for instance, which historically, is one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, the religious right there, or some of the religious right, I should say, are quite vehemently opposed to environmental legislation. And even some of them kind of using their beliefs to actually deny that the climate crisis is happening. So I certainly wouldn't say that religion is, or religions are uniformly, trying to tackle this problem. And it's also important, to understand that people that are non-religious, are still very ethical, very moral, very compassionate, and very concerned about future generations and the future of our planet as well.
Yeah, and that is a good point. So, Melanie, the Christian Climate Change, your group interrupted the Church of England's General Synod last Friday, calling for the end of the Church to investing in, carbon-intensive companies, which, I was surprised to hear that it does, because that just doesn't feel right, does it? So you're there campaigning against that. How can the church be taken seriously if they're still investing in carbon-intensive activities?
Well, one of the things that we think needs to happen is that people of faith and churches, as institutions, need to speak out on this issue. They need to put their money where their mouth is. They need to take that action and lead from the front, which is why we went into the synod to remind them of that duty.
So would you agree, as they are not doing that, we can't take them seriously until they do?
Well, I think that you have to remember that perfect is the enemy of good, or good enough. And we need everyone to be doing everything. And you can't say, don't do anything or don't speak out about something because you're not perfect. We all live in a world. Basically, it's really important that we all take individual action. But this is a systemic issue. This is an issue that involves the society in which we live, and it's very difficult to all make very good decisions in the society in which we live. And so it's important that we engage in changing that society. And I think that is where individual Christians, individual people of faith and churches and other faith institutions have such an important role to play. They should be out there engaging in the political life of this country, saying, this is not good enough. This is where we have to change.
Charlie, if religious leaders didn't feel strongly about this, they wouldn't be putting their necks on the line for this, would they? There is no benefit to them to do it just for them. They're doing this for all of us, and that is important.
I'm not entirely convinced by that. I think a lot of these institutions have dwindling flocks, and recently we've seen a shift, I think, in many churches towards latching on to big national conversations of the day, where otherwise previously they wouldn't be involved. Issues such as gender conversations or controversies surrounding race. I think we've seen Justin Welby latch onto these quite regularly. I'm not sure that's the case. But I just want to take it back to the previous discussion about changing society with spirituality, etc. And we've heard the term greed used, for example. A best part of 1 billion people around the world still live in poverty, extreme poverty, less than $1.20 a day. And carbon and fossil fuels and all these things are very useful for emancipating those people. And while I agree that it's very important that we steward and save the nation, save the world, a big part of, I think, spiritual life should be about emancipating humans, rising them from the destitute suffering that many of them endure. And fossil fuels are what we have enjoyed to reach that stage. Yeah. Why not allow developing countries to do the same?
It sounds like you're saying that the church is only involved for a PR exercise. I mean, this is just PR. It just looks good, because the flocks are dwindling and they need people to be on board.
Well, it depends where you look to see that the flocks are dwindling. However, I would say that there's a real power in religious communities. You know, they'll listen. Quite often they'll trust their faith leaders, whether it's the imam in the mosque, the guru in the gurdwara, you know, the pastor in the church. There's a real sense of trust there. So if the religious leaders, like they did in Scotland, make a statement, they have got really huge congregations behind them that are listening to what they're saying, and that can make a huge difference. And that letter alone, I mean, that's only one thing that they've done. They've done so much more than that. But you'll see that there are Muslims, there are Sikhs, there are Hindus, there are Baha'is, there are Christians, and they're all signing this saying, please, we want to know, you know, you made a pact in Glasgow, this is what you said you'd do, you would work across the globe, because it has to be global solutions to this problem. You work across the globe to bring the emissions down to below 1.5. And we have to know, where are you at with this? What governments are doing that, you know, what are you doing to make this happen? And it's just so critical. And I think there's a power, not just in the Christian churches coming together, but all faith traditions coming together and having a very strong voice in this. And of course the non-religious too.
Yeah, so you're included there, Laurie. I mean,
yeah, sorry.
So Melanie, you think about the life at the moment, there's a cost of living crisis, there's a war going on in Ukraine, there are other things that are at the top of the agenda. How do we make this a really important thing, because it is important, isn't it?
It is vital, because when you think of the war in Ukraine and you think of the cost of living crisis, if you imagine sort of tidal waves, the big one that's coming up behind that is the climate and biodiversity crisis. And that will make everything so much worse, and it will do so in a period of not very many years. Sir David King, the former chief scientific advisor to the government, back in February 2021 said that what we do in the next 3 to 4 years will determine the future of humanity. So this needs to be on the agenda all the time. But the thing we need to remember is that they aren't separate problems. We can tackle the cost of living crisis with measures that would help the climate and the biodiversity crisis. We need to move to a green agenda. And just to return to Charlie's point about countries that are developing, to use that terminology, and using fossil fuels, what we really need to do is to help them to leapfrog fossil fuels, which we know will cost them so much in the long term in terms of climate crisis, and move straight to green fuels. And that is possible. We can help them to go to green energy.
Yeah, Laurie, you're on the same sofa. You're on different sides, but would you agree with most of what she said there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would.
Yeah, and so what's the way forward in your eyes? Anything to add to that?
Well, I just think,
pretty comprehensive. But...
Yeah, I just think people, do need to be involved, obviously on a global scale, in terms of policy, in terms of individual action. And really, however you can best engage personally, whether that is through a faith group, whether it's through a belief group, whether it's through a secular organisation. You know, we mustn't forget there's fantastic NGOs that have been doing really hard work in this area for decades. So, you know, however you can engage, whatever feels right to you, you know, go for it. That's fantastic.
Well, thank you all for coming in. It's a fascinating debate. And it is one, I think, that will go on and on, Jackie.
It certainly will, Sean. And we're moving from one big issue to another, the cost of living and inflation.